Jason was just another quiet child, more of an observer than a participant in his elementary school class. He was gentle-natured, with a tendency to watch his classmates from the sidelines, and his close relationship with his mother often made him more empathetic to others' hardships than most kids his age. Life was simple for him, filled with lunch hours at his mom's packed lunches, gentle encouragement, and a humble but comfortable home. One crisp spring morning, as he took his seat in his newly shuffled classroom, Jason noticed a girl in the back row who seemed to shrink from the world around her. She wore clothes that looked a few sizes too big, frayed around the edges, her hair hastily pulled back, as though she'd had little time to tend to herself. Her name was Katie. She had an air about her that, even in silence, communicated her discomfort and self-consciousness. She rarely raised her hand, avoided eye contact, and always seemed to try to be as invisible as possible. Jason observed her closely that day, his curiosity tugging at him as he watched her hunch lower in her seat each time the teacher glanced her way. Something about Katie's small presence filled him with a desire to reach out, though he didn't quite know how. Later, he learned from some older kids that Katie's family wasn't doing well financially. It was during lunch that Jason noticed the way Katie quietly watched the other children unpacking their lunches. He glanced back at her desk, which was completely bare, and could see her glancing, almost longingly, at the food other kids were enjoying. Jason had always brought extra food packed by his mother, who insisted he should never go hungry. In that moment, he felt compelled to share. But there was a problem. The teacher was in the room, meaning he couldn't just walk over and offer her food without drawing attention. As lunch continued, Jason watched Katie. Her gaze seemed to drift to the window instead, as though she was pretending not to be hungry at all. Determined, Jason waited until the teacher stepped out for a brief moment. Quickly, he wrapped a small sandwich in his napkin and slipped it to her with a quiet whisper. Katie hesitated, glancing up at him with wide, unsure eyes before she finally nodded, accepting the sandwich with a soft thank you. That small moment between them marked the beginning of something that would change both their lives. That night, Jason went home, reflecting on Katie's expression as she had eaten. He knew he wanted to help her somehow, so he told his mother about Katie's situation. His mom listened, concern etched across her face, and promised that from then on, she'd pack a little extra for Jason's friend. Jason felt a warm sense of pride as he realized his mother's kindness would allow him to continue helping Katie, someone who seemed to need a friend more than anyone else. The next day, Jason found himself eagerly looking forward to lunchtime, the weight of his packed lunch heavier than usual with the added portion for Katie. He felt a nervous flutter in his stomach, wondering if she'd accept it again. As the clock ticked closer to noon, he stole glances at her, but she kept her eyes downcast, as if unaware of the small yet significant act of kindness from the day before. When lunchtime finally arrived, Jason carefully placed the extra sandwich on her desk, watching as she stared at it in surprise. Katie's hands hesitated, almost as if she didn't believe it was meant for her. When she finally looked up at Jason, there was a glimmer of gratitude and something else, perhaps relief, in her eyes. She didn't speak, but the way she held the sandwich close, eating it quietly and without the usual glances at the other kids, told him enough. They didn't talk, yet there was a silent understanding that passed between them, an acknowledgement of a small yet profound bond. As days turned into weeks, Jason and Katie started walking home together. Their route was the same, leading them past the park and down a stretch of quiet residential streets. Little by little, Katie opened up to him, sharing fragments of her life. She spoke in a soft, almost resigned tone about her father, who hadn't worked in years, and her mother, who juggled several part-time jobs just to keep a roof over their heads. Her clothes, which she wore again and again, had become threadbare with time, each tear and patch a silent testament to her family's struggles. Katie's honesty made Jason's heart ache. He couldn't imagine what it was like to live under such heavy circumstances. He often thought of how different his own life was, filled with homemade meals, clean clothes, and a mother who had the time and energy to make his life comfortable. Jason started to realize just how much he'd taken for granted. The sense of unfairness he felt for Katie grew with each story she shared, and he knew he wanted to be her friend, to be the one good thing in her life if he could. One afternoon, as they reached the familiar corner where they'd part ways, Jason made a promise to himself. He'd be there for Katie, no matter how small the gesture. He couldn't fix her family's problems, but he could make sure she never felt alone again. The act of sharing lunch became their daily ritual. Jason's mother, true to her word, packed extra food without question, and every day, Jason would set Katie's portion on her desk as though it were the most natural thing in the world. As the weeks passed, Katie's once hesitant thank yous turned into shy smiles, a small but profound change. Jason found himself growing protective of her, silently glaring at anyone who dared cast a judgmental glance in her direction. When he got home each day, his mother would ask him how Katie was doing, and Jason would relay whatever small bits he'd learned. He could tell his mom had grown attached to Katie in her own way, touched by the stories of hardship Jason shared. There was a kindness in his mother's eyes each time she packed a little extra, and it made Jason feel proud to be her son. Jason's friendship with Katie deepened, their conversations ranging from homework to favorite shows and small childhood dreams. They discovered shared secrets and developed inside jokes, an invisible thread tying them together. Though they came from different worlds, Jason found comfort in Katie's presence. He realized that she made him feel more grounded, and he hoped he was doing the same for her. But as their bond grew, so did the teasing from their classmates. Some of the more popular kids would whisper and laugh whenever they saw the two of them together, tossing careless remarks that stung. Jason braved it out, never letting go of the purpose he felt in being Katie's friend, but the words still hurt. Through it all, Katie would look at him with a steady gaze, as if his friendship alone could weather the storm. One afternoon, as they walked past a group of kids from their class, someone called out, "Are you two dating?" The remark was accompanied by laughter, and Jason felt his face burn with embarrassment. He could tell Katie felt it too. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushed with a mix of humiliation and hurt. Jason wanted to shout back, to defend her, but he knew that reacting would only make things worse. That evening, he lay in bed replaying the incident in his mind, feeling angry and helpless. He hated that Katie had to endure such meanness just for being herself, and he resented his classmates for not understanding how special she was. Determined not to let their cruelty affect their friendship, Jason resolved to stand by her, no matter what. He promised himself that he'd always be her friend. Not long after, Jason's family hit a rough patch. His father was laid off, and the household suddenly felt the strain of living on a single income. Though his mother tried to hide her worry, Jason could sense the tension. For the first time, he understood what it meant to be without, even in a modest way. It made him appreciate Katie's resilience even more, knowing she'd lived this reality her whole life. The extra food in Jason's lunchbox became harder to manage, but his mother didn't let it slip. She continued to pack food for Katie without complaint, only occasionally wearing a faraway look when Jason asked about it. He felt a pang of guilt, but his mother's commitment reminded him that their family would get through it, just as Katie's family did, each day. The small sacrifices they made to help her felt like a shared burden, a reminder of the strength they found in helping others. Just when it seemed like things were beginning to settle, Jason arrived at school one morning to find Katie's desk empty. A substitute teacher announced that she had moved to another town. Shocked and hurt, Jason felt his heart sink. He hadn't had a chance to say goodbye, and he'd never even imagined she might leave. The thought of her going through another set of hardships in a new place filled him with sorrow. For the first time in a long while, Jason felt truly alone. The lunches, the conversations, the walks, they were all memories now. That afternoon, he trudged home, the silence hanging heavy around him. He promised himself he'd never forget her and that somehow, one day, he'd find a way to help someone else the way he'd helped Katie. Years went by. Jason graduated high school and worked his way into college, determined to build a life where he could help others. He majored in business, hoping to eventually work for a company that shared his values. He was driven by his memories of Katie and the lessons she taught him about resilience and compassion, even if those lessons were taught without words. After college, Jason landed a job at a respectable firm. He worked long hours and proved himself in the workplace, driven by a quiet dedication that set him apart. Though he was respected, he often felt a pang of nostalgia for the friendship he'd once had with Katie, a connection he'd yet to find with anyone else. In time, Jason's work ethic earned him promotions, and he moved up within his company. Though he found satisfaction in his work, he still felt a sense of emptiness. The daily grind wore on him, but he carried on, often wondering what might have happened to Katie. He liked to think she'd found her own path to success, imagining her as a strong, confident woman thriving in the world. Jason's commitment to helping others shone through in every project he took on. He volunteered for roles that supported underprivileged communities, believing that even small efforts could make a difference. It was an ordinary day at the office when Jason's company prepared for a high-stakes meeting. They were courting a new business partner, an influential executive whose company was known for its social initiatives. Jason, as part of the team overseeing the partnership, took his place at the long, polished conference table, shuffling through documents as the room filled with chatter and anticipation. When the doors finally opened, a figure entered, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, with an air of confidence that commanded attention. Jason's heart skipped as he glanced up. She looked familiar, though he couldn't immediately place where he'd seen her before. Her gaze swept the room, and for a brief moment, her eyes locked with his, a spark of recognition dancing there. The executive, introduced as Ms. Katie Reeves, extended her hand across the table, smiling as if greeting an old friend. "Jason, do you remember me?" she asked, her voice calm but warm, carrying a hint of nostalgia. The room's polite chatter faded into silence as Jason's mind raced back to his childhood. The girl with the worn-out clothes, the friend who'd shared quiet conversations and long walks home. He could barely believe it, standing before him was Katie, the same girl he'd shared his lunches with all those years ago. But now, she was transformed, radiating a quiet power that spoke of strength hard-won through life's challenges. Katie smiled as Jason's shock softened into joy, and she extended her hand again, this time with a stronger grip, a gesture that seemed to say, "I'm here. I made it." For a moment, Jason was at a loss for words, but as he took her hand, he felt the years melt away, replaced by a sense of pride in seeing what she'd become. The two of them shared a brief, meaningful look, their shared history speaking volumes in that silent exchange. After the meeting, Katie invited Jason to catch up over coffee. They found a quiet corner in the company lounge, and she began to share her story. Life hadn't been easy after she'd moved away, her family had continued to struggle, and she'd faced setback after setback. But through sheer determination, Katie had worked her way through school, and later, through the corporate ranks, driven by the desire to create a better future for others like her. Jason listened, moved by her resilience. She spoke of her mother's sacrifices, of years spent studying late into the night while working part-time jobs to pay for school. As she spoke, Jason felt a surge of admiration. She had risen above her circumstances, building a life of purpose and success. He realized then that the small act of kindness he'd shown her had not been forgotten. It had helped set her on the path that had led her here. As their conversation continued, Katie mentioned that she'd heard about Jason's reputation for his dedication to community-focused projects within his company. She had an idea that could bring their two companies together, not just for profit, but to create something lasting, a program to support underprivileged students in their education. "I think we could make a real difference," she said, her eyes alight with passion. "We both know how one small act of kindness can change a life." Jason felt a renewed sense of purpose and agreed. The project Katie proposed would not only benefit their companies but also serve as a tribute to their past, proof that even the smallest connections could yield something extraordinary. He knew that working with Katie would be a rare and meaningful opportunity, one that would bring them both full circle in a way they never expected. The collaboration between Jason's and Katie's companies was unlike anything he'd ever been a part of. They assembled a dedicated team, brainstorming ways to reach students from low-income backgrounds. The project was set to provide scholarships, mentorship programs, and essential resources for children who, like Katie once had, faced overwhelming odds against them. But as they progressed, Jason noticed a deep-seated passion in Katie, a determination that far surpassed his own. Working alongside her, he saw her tireless dedication, her insistence on excellence in every aspect. It was inspiring to watch her command the respect of her colleagues, the same quiet strength he'd first seen years ago now transformed into the fierce resilience of a leader. Through it all, Katie's focus remained steady. For her, this was more than business. It was a way to rewrite her past, to give back in a way that would matter. One evening, after a long day, Jason and Katie stayed late, reflecting on their project's goals. Jason asked Katie how she managed to stay so focused, given all the hardships she'd endured. Katie hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window. She spoke about the pain of being treated as less than, the taunts of other children, the isolation that left her feeling invisible. Jason could see how those old wounds had shaped her, even as she'd risen above them. He realized then that, although she appeared strong and confident, some scars never fully faded. In that quiet moment, Jason found himself opening up too, sharing his own doubts and insecurities. Together, they acknowledged the parts of themselves still touched by their childhood struggles, finding comfort in the understanding that they were both still healing in their own ways. As the project gained momentum, they had to present it to the board of directors, a formidable task given the scope of the initiative. Jason and Katie rehearsed their pitch tirelessly, ensuring every angle was covered, every objection anticipated. On the day of the presentation, Katie took the lead. She spoke with conviction, painting a vivid picture of the potential impact their project could have on countless lives. Katie's presentation was impassioned, a rare moment where her vulnerability and strength shone side by side. By the time she finished, there was a quiet respect in the room, as if the board had been moved in ways they hadn't anticipated. Though they approved the project, their decision was reluctant, and Jason knew they'd face scrutiny at every step. But with Katie by his side, he felt ready for the challenge. Just as things seemed to be progressing smoothly, disaster struck. A sudden financial crisis threatened the stability of both companies. Budgets were slashed, departments restructured, and resources for the project were drastically reduced. Jason watched as Katie fought to keep their initiative alive, meeting with investors, pleading their case to anyone who would listen, her resolve unwavering. Jason was inspired by her determination, but he worried about her, noticing the toll the setbacks were taking. Yet, Katie remained steadfast, refusing to let the project fall apart. Her resilience became his own source of strength, and together, they strategized ways to adapt, scaling down certain aspects while focusing on the most crucial components. With funds stretched thin, Jason and Katie took matters into their own hands, reaching out to potential partners who shared their vision. They spent countless hours crafting pitches, revisiting and refining their plans to ensure the project could still succeed, even with limited resources. Their shared determination brought them closer, strengthening their friendship in ways they hadn't expected. During one particularly late night, Katie looked over at Jason, a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. "You know, I couldn't have done this without you," she said softly. Jason smiled, feeling a sense of pride and fulfillment that went beyond professional achievement. This project had become more than work. It was a testament to their shared journey, a symbol of the strength they'd found together. Just when things looked bleak, an unexpected supporter emerged, a former classmate of Katie's, someone who had once mocked her for her poverty. Now a successful investor, he reached out after reading about the project in a news article, offering to contribute financially. "I didn't understand back then," he admitted, guilt evident in his voice. "But now I see the courage it took for you to keep going. I'd like to help if you'll let me." Katie was taken aback, her emotions a mix of surprise and gratitude. Jason watched as she gracefully accepted the offer, her response filled with humility and forgiveness. She knew that her strength lay not in holding on to grudges but in transforming her pain into something that could benefit others. And with this unexpected support, the project was back on track, stronger than ever. With the new financial support, Jason and Katie breathed life back into their project, restoring the programs they'd initially cut. They hired additional staff and expanded the scholarship offerings, determined to reach as many students as possible. The renewed momentum filled both of them with hope, and their offices buzzed with excitement as their colleagues rallied behind them. Together, they attended community events, speaking at schools, sharing their vision with students who reminded Jason of Katie as a young girl. Seeing the excitement and hope in the children's eyes strengthened their commitment, reminding them that the work they were doing mattered. It wasn't just about the numbers, it was about giving every child a chance at a better future. As the project continued to grow, Jason and Katie decided to hold a public event to unveil their work to the community. Journalists, families, and supporters gathered to hear them speak about the project's mission. Katie took the stage, sharing her story with a raw honesty that captivated the crowd. She spoke of her own struggles, of the moments when she'd felt invisible, and of the small kindness that had reminded her she mattered. Jason watched, pride swelling in his chest as Katie's words moved the audience to tears. Her courage in sharing her past and owning her journey made the impact of their project undeniable. When she finished, the crowd erupted in applause, and Jason knew they had created something far more powerful than they'd ever imagined. The public attention surrounding their project soon brought personal challenges for Katie. She received a letter from her estranged father, who had seen the event on television and was reaching out for the first time in years. Unsure of how to respond, Katie turned to Jason, who offered his quiet support. He didn't push her to make any decisions, instead giving her the space she needed to process her feelings. Katie struggled with her past, torn between anger and the possibility of forgiveness. She didn't know if she wanted her father back in her life, but she recognized that letting go of her resentment might bring her peace. In the end, she decided to write him a letter, a gesture that was more for her own healing than for him. As she read it aloud to Jason, he saw a weight lift from her shoulders, her spirit lighter than he'd ever seen before. As Katie placed the letter in the mail, she felt a strange sense of relief. She hadn't written to rekindle a relationship with her father, but to free herself from the weight of anger she had carried for so long. By forgiving him, she was choosing to let go of the resentment that had lingered, freeing herself to focus fully on her present and future. Standing next to the mailbox, Jason quietly took her hand, offering silent support. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to her. On their walk back to the office, Katie shared how strange it felt to finally release all that pain. For years, she had allowed her past to influence her decisions, shape her motivations, and dictate her goals. But now, with the letter sent, she felt a sense of closure. She smiled at Jason, thanking him for standing by her through it all. Their friendship had become a safe harbor for her, and she felt an overwhelming gratitude for having him by her side. The project began making real changes in the community. Scholarships and mentorship programs launched, reaching out to students who, like Katie once had, were quietly struggling. Jason and Katie often visited the program sites together, interacting with the children and hearing their stories. It filled them with joy to witness the direct impact of their work, knowing that they were providing these children with opportunities they had once only dreamed of. One day, a young girl named Lila shyly approached Katie after one of her speeches. With trembling hands, she presented Katie with a crumpled letter, thanking her for the program and sharing how it had already changed her life. Katie read the letter with tears in her eyes, seeing her own journey mirrored in Lila's words. This was why she had fought so hard for the project, to give others hope, just as Jason's kindness had once done for her. As the project continued to grow, news of its success spread nationally. Katie and Jason found themselves being interviewed for newspapers, magazines, and even national television. Their project was held up as an example of how businesses could make a meaningful difference in their communities. Both companies received awards and recognition, but it was the children's achievements that filled Jason and Katie with the most pride. At an awards ceremony, Katie was invited to the stage to give a speech. She spoke with humility, acknowledging her own past struggles and thanking the many people, especially Jason, who had helped her along the way. Jason listened, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The years of hard work and sacrifice had all led to this moment. They were no longer just colleagues or childhood friends, they had become partners in something far greater than themselves. After the ceremony, Katie and Jason took a moment to step outside and reflect on their journey together. The night was quiet, and the city lights sparkled in the distance, casting a soft glow over the moment. They laughed, reminiscing about their elementary school days, recalling the sandwiches and walks home that had built their friendship. It felt surreal to think about how far they'd come, each shaping the other's path in ways they never could have anticipated. Katie turned to Jason, her voice filled with gratitude. "You know, I used to think the world was against me. But looking back, I realized that you were my turning point." Jason was silent for a moment, moved by her words. "We helped each other, Katie," he replied, his voice soft. "And I wouldn't change a thing." In that quiet moment, they understood that their friendship had been a gift, something that had given both their lives purpose and meaning. The success of the project inspired Katie and Jason to dream even bigger. They decided to establish a nonprofit foundation dedicated to supporting underprivileged youth, offering educational resources, scholarships, and mentorships. This new foundation became a shared vision, a legacy that would allow them to continue giving back long after they'd retired. They worked together to secure funding, partnering with other organizations and companies to expand their reach. The foundation quickly became a model for other communities and companies, drawing interest from organizations across the country. It was fulfilling work, but also a testament to how their friendship had grown into a partnership of shared values and purpose. Jason often marveled at how a simple act of kindness had led to something so much larger. They had turned their shared past into a force for good, a way to offer hope and opportunity to countless others. As the first anniversary of the foundation approached, Katie and Jason organized a celebration to honor the students they'd helped and the mentors who'd volunteered their time. The event was filled with laughter and gratitude, as former students shared their stories and thanked them for their support. Jason and Katie listened with full hearts, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment and joy. Toward the end of the evening, Jason found himself alone on the balcony, looking out over the crowd. Katie joined him, a glass of sparkling cider in her hand. "Here's to the next chapter," she said, raising her glass with a smile. Jason clinked his glass with hers, filled with gratitude for their shared journey and excited for the future that lay ahead. They had transformed their childhood friendship into a legacy of kindness, creating something that would last for generations. Years passed, and the foundation flourished, helping thousands of students across the country. Katie and Jason continued to work together, mentoring new leaders to carry on their vision. Their friendship, tested and strengthened through the years, had become the heart of everything they'd built. The foundation was no longer just their project, it was a living legacy, a testament to the power of kindness and resilience. On their final day at the foundation, Jason and Katie took one last walk through the halls, passing walls lined with photos of students, mentors, and events that had defined their journey. They knew they were leaving the foundation in capable hands, yet saying goodbye felt bittersweet. Standing by the entrance, they turned to face each other, each knowing they had changed one another's lives in ways they never could have imagined. "Thank you, Jason," Katie said softly. "For everything." Jason felt a lump in his throat as he looked back at her. "No, thank you, Katie," he replied. "For believing that one small act of kindness could change the world." With a final shared smile, they walked out together, leaving behind a legacy of hope, compassion, and resilience that would continue to touch lives for generations to come.